back on the podcast with Nicki Jhbvala of the Washington Post. She's in her second year covering the team for that exalted publication. And Nicki, I appreciate you joining me. I know you're covering the league meetings in New York this week, and there's an awful lot to cover for this football team, but how have you enjoyed it so far in your year and a half on duty?
It's been very interesting. They keep me busy, so I'm enjoying it. You learn a lot on this beat. I'll say that.
I think one of the interesting things when you cover a team is that you go and you cover a team and you have no idea what is going to happen, and you have no idea what the news is going to be, whether it comes on the field, whether it comes off the field. And to me, I think being a reporter at this time in your life is probably going to be, when you look back at your career, you're going to look at it and say, there was never a more important time than this era in covering a team than covering Washington at this time. And I think particularly I look at sort of the swirl of news around covering Daniel Snyder. And I know over time, the Post has had a really lousy relationship with Daniel Snyder. And I wonder, how difficult has it been for you and the paper to cover this story with the sexual harassment claims against him because of that?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about the Washington Post is we have so many tremendous resources, so many tremendous reporters. So it doesn't just fall on me, the beat reporter. We have so many people like Will Hobson and Liz Clark and Beth Reinhardt who are so well versed in this that we're able to all jump in and pull together our skills and really get what we need, no matter the circumstances. And I think that's the job of a reporter. It's not going to be handed to you. It's not going to be easy, but you've got to find some way to get the information you need. And I feel fortunate that I'm at the Post because we have those resources, but it is difficult at times. You always come into this thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to cover football. It's going to be great. But that's the beauty of sports journalism in my mind, is it always transcends the sport. It's never just about that. It's always, you're talking about business, you're talking about health, you're talking about social matters. You're in some ways covering Congress, sometimes covering the DEA. So it's always different, and it challenges you as a reporter. So I enjoy it.
I think back in 1978 when I interviewed for the job that you now have. I was covering the Giants at Newsday, and I went down to interview at the Washington Post with then sports editor George Solomon, and he said to me at the end of the interview, I want you to go meet Ben Bradley. And I said, oh my God. I mean, I might be asking this guy for his autograph. But anyway, I went in and met him, and he said to me during the course of the conversation that, clearly this is other than the White House. And he said, and maybe the Supreme Court, this is the most important beat on the paper, covering the football team. And I bring that up only because it just seems so different now. Because, you look at the stands at a Washington home game, and, if it's a mediocre game late in the year, there's nobody there. There's so many empty seats. I've heard stories about how desperate they are to sell tickets and all that. So as you look at this franchise right now, what's the biggest issue confronting it to try to get back to the days of hail to the WFT, so to speak?
Right. Well, I think there are two, and probably equally important, is one, the culture around the organization, making sure it's a respectable franchise, one that fans can root for. And I think a lot of what Jason Wright and his team over there is geared toward doing that. It's going to be difficult. Is it possible? I don't know yet. We'll see. But, they got 20 years really that they're trying to, climb out of. It was a pretty dark 20 years for this franchise, and that's why those stands are empty. I think fans for the Washington football team are still incredibly loyal. I mean, they have an incredible fan base, but they've been through a lot. They've been promised change. They've seen people come in and out who believe they can fix a team and it never works out. They've seen quarterbacks cycle in and out. It's kind of the same story every time. So to really build up that trust again in these fans, it's going to take some time, and they're going to have to win, frankly. I thought last year was a good start. The start to this season has been tough, especially with everything else going around. So to get people in those seats, you got to start winning, and you got to prove that this change is real.
What's your opinion of the new management team led by Jason Wright?
I think he's hired some incredibly smart people. They've come from primarily outside sports, which is good. At times it can create issues. Like you think about the Sean Taylor jersey retirement. I kind of felt like if they had more people in there who knew about the franchise, who knew about the general workings of, how this is done in the NFL, maybe it wouldn't have gone the way it did and created so much controversy. But I think he's tried to implement a lot of really good changes. I just think at some point, if it hasn't already, there's going to be a demand for a return on that investment, because they did invest a lot in that leadership group. And then what? Is there going to be a timeline on when they can really get this thing together? If it's not to, Dan Snyder's liking financially, does it all end? Does he blow it all up? What happens when Dan Snyder officially, unofficially returns and assumes full control? I would imagine Tanya Snyder would still have some role, but what happens then? And that's always been the question for this franchise. You bring in some people for change, but eventually you feel like it's not going to last. And will this one last? We'll see.
It brings me to the future of Snyder. Do you have any feeling? What do your sources tell you, or NFL sources tell you, or anybody at the Post now, about when Daniel Snyder returns to basically full power?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I remember, I believe it was on that conference call after they released, or not really released, the Wilkinson findings, said at least through the fall meetings, which is now, that, he would not be controlling the day-to-day duties. Whether they continue to say that and he's more on the longer term projects with the stadium, fine. I still think, as Dan Snyder, as owner of this franchise, he's going to be heavily involved no matter what. And what that means for the team, could be good or bad. The track record has not been great. So it's going to be a matter of how he delegates that power. To me, the bigger issue is, what happens to that leadership team? What happens to Jason Wright? Who does he still have the authority he needs to continue to make changes in that front office? You never know.
As you sort of look at the franchise right now, let's talk a little bit about football. I was really interested in seeing how Taylor Heinicke would do over an extended period, because last year, after the playoff game, when he played so well and, quite frankly, so valiantly against Tampa Bay in the wild card game, I said, I'd love to see this guy get a chance. Mm-hmm. And I've seen him get a chance. And I'm not sure what to think of him, other than to say, if I'm Washington, I'm still quarterback prospecting. Yeah. I don't think that I've seen enough to say I want to hand the franchise to this guy to give him a significant midterm opportunity to be this quarterback. What do you think the football side of this organization is thinking about the quarterback position right now?
Yeah, I think they probably view him similarly. Like, he can be a very good backup, a starter when you need him. I think the biggest thing with him is he's inexperienced, and you kind of knew that at some point after those first couple games, maybe defenses would start to figure him out. I mean, covered the Broncos for 6 years, many of those after Peyton Manning's retirement. So you saw sort of the same thing where guys like Trevor Siemian would come in, have some really incredible 2 games, and you're like, wow, who's this kid? And then the defenses start to figure him out, and it kind of unravels. Heinicke has a really interesting skill set. He's mobile. He's a smart player. Doesn't have the strongest arm. Accuracy is a little bit of an issue, but you can kind of see where the coaches tell him something and he corrects it the next game. The problem with this situation is they don't have a ton of time. They have talent on defense. It was a good defense last year. They have talent there. They got to figure out all their issues there, but they can get that side together. The question is, how long will they have that group together? And my belief is you're only going to go so far as your quarterback will take you in this league. So while the defense can be great until they find a quarterback, it's you're only going to go so far. So I believe they are very much in the quarterback hunt. I think they're always going to be until they find somebody they think can help them win for a while.
Do you think they're, as we record this, we're 1 week away from the trading deadline. And I wonder if Deshaun Watson's going to get traded, period. Mm-hmm. But to me, Washington's one of 4 or 5 teams that I think of when I say, geez, could he get traded and who'd be interested? You think they have any legitimate interest, and might they be players in this next week for Deshaun Watson?
I would be very surprised if they were. I was told adamantly that they have not had any talks with Houston or Miami regarding Tua, so they didn't want Tua. But, Ron Rivera has stressed over his, year and a half, almost 2 years here, that he wants to find the right type of players, the right character. And while the legal case is pending on Deshaun Watson, that's a big gamble right there. And, they've also said they don't want to mortgage to the future to one position. Well, they would have to if they want to trade for Deshaun Watson, given the asking price from Houston. So does it make sense for them as a rebuilding team to give up all those picks? To me, no, absolutely not. They have so many holes to fill on that roster, and you also don't know, what is his status? Can he play? Until his legal case is resolved, I would be very hesitant to pull the plug on that.
Could you imagine the firestorm among women's groups and, quite frankly, human groups?
Yeah.
If after getting into this incredibly damaging and divisive sexual harassment investigation in their organization, if they cast their lot for the future with a guy who, I doubt he's going to do jail time or anything, or prison time, but a guy who is under investigation for some of the seediest and most offensive sexual accusations that we've heard in a while. So on the surface, it might seem like, hey, why don't you get involved with one of the best young quarterbacks in football? But you delve in a little bit deeper and you say, man, you talk about something that would bring the protesters. There'd be more people outside FedEx Field than at their next home game than there would be inside at FedEx Field, I think.
And I think Ron Rivera is very cognizant of that. I can't see him bringing that to the organization, giving everything that they're going through now, and just period. I think he's very aware of the circumstances, and is trying to do what's best for the team on and off the field. It would be great to have his talent. I can see that from, football side, but there's a lot more going in here that I think any owner, any coach, any executive, I would hope would consider. As a woman in football, I would hope would consider.
Nicki, I'm going to end with a question about our business, just because I'm curious about it. I've been asking a lot of beat people just because I'm curious, and it may be a little bit too much of an inside baseball question, but what's it been like to cover a team that you're expected to know everything about for the last year and a half in the time of COVID, where you can't have the same kind of relationships with players and people inside the team because you just simply can't be around them the same way? the locker rooms aren't open. You don't have the same sort of one-on-one access to people. So tell me what it's been like.
It's been difficult, especially starting on a new beat with a completely new regime. Last year, Ron Rivera and his staff came in. So, I hadn't stood in front of Ron Rivera in person, at least not from more than 100 feet, really, until really this past January. And that's difficult. We were fortunate at the Post in that we still traveled. So we were able to get to see a little bit more on the road, but you occasionally see these guys and, you wave to Ron Rivera and you realize, oh my gosh, he has no idea who I am because I'm wearing a mask. He doesn't recognize me. It's weird. So trying to establish those relationships with people you've never met on a new beat, it's difficult, but you gotta find a way, right? So, it requires a lot of phone calls, a lot of, taking chances on, hey, will you just talk to me by Zoom, just informally? I just want to introduce myself. You have to get creative. And in some ways, I think that's, the silver lining of this from a reporting standpoint is it really challenges you. You got to find new ways to make connections. And some of these methods are going to last, so you got to get used to them. But it really forces you out of your comfort zone to find new ways to build that trust, meet new people, and ultimately get the information you need.
I think one of the things that I respect about the people doing the job now is exactly what you said, because look, I know this from having done it for a long time, that I would say somewhere between the majority to vast majority of good contacts that I've made are in some ways accidental and by chance. And that is, it's just like, and I'll give you an example. It's just like 3 years ago when I was at Broncos training camp, I was going to do a story about these bookend pass rushers, Von Miller and Bradley Chubb. And Patrick Smythe, the PR guy, said, you really might want to talk to their coach, a guy who's a young guy, really bright guy, a guy named Brandon Staley. Well, I had vaguely heard of Brandon Staley, but I take out my NFL record and fact book and I read about Brandon Staley. And the thought occurs to me, 2 years ago, this guy was a defensive coordinator in the Ohio Athletic Conference. He's playing Heidelberg and Baldwin Wallace. And he's a coach there. And I met him and we had maybe a half-hour conversation. And I just said, now this guy is going to be really, really good. And from that half-hour conversation, now I've formed the kind of relationship with him where this year at training camp with the Chargers, now that he's the head coach, I was able to just basically sit in on a coach's meeting and watch how he delegates authority and all that stuff. But those kind of things need to happen for you to get really good at your job, because those are the people. I didn't have any idea what would happen to Brandon Staley, whether he'd even be still in football 3 years from now. But when you cover a team or when you're around a team, you get to sort of zero in on certain guys who you respect. And that was always in the back of my mind. Wherever I go from now on, wherever he's coaching, I'm going to make sure that I keep in touch with this guy. So that's one of the things that I think, I'm not saying it's been lost, but it's been damaged a little bit by the last year and a half.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I'm guilty of this too. And you sometimes forget that the coaches, the players, they also remember a lot of interactions. They see a lot of things, especially on social media. I had a conversation with Brandon Staley shortly after he came on to talk about, Chubb and Von. And I never thought that he would remember my name or even remember that conversation. He probably talks to a ton of people every day, but when I left the Broncos beat to go to the Post, he was one of the first people to text me. And I'm like, wow, he remembered that. And I feel like sometimes we don't give a lot of these players and coaches enough credit to what they see and what they retain. Like just the other day, I remember last year, I tweeted something before a game of John Matsko, the Washington's offensive line coach. He works with a lot of the linemen pregame just on footwork, hand placement. And I was always fascinated by this because I feel like I learn more about the position when I'm watching them, and had no idea that, John Matsko would happen to see that, or his grandkids would see that on Twitter. And, the other day he saw me standing outside the media room and said, I just wanted to introduce myself. You're the one that posted that video of me and David Steinmetz. And we had a very nice conversation. And it's like, you forget some of these things. So that's unfortunately where, these connections are built through Twitter or, one-off conversations, but they're just as important. So you got to make the best of it, that you don't get that locker room time. I'm not sure we'll all ever get that locker room time again, but those little interactions still really matter.
Well, I do want to bring up before we go your story on Sunday about Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator of the Green Bay Packers. He'll be in the news this week because the apparently shorthanded Packers are going to play the best team in football on Thursday night in Arizona. But that was a really good example, in my opinion, in reporting a story about a person and all the things he brings to his job, because he's such a well-rounded, interesting guy who's got so many other interests outside of football. And I thought what was so interesting about the story is that one of the reasons that he has such a good relationship with Aaron Rodgers, this is just me reading between the lines, you would know. One of the reasons he has such a good relationship with Aaron Rodgers is that Aaron Rodgers looks at him as a full person.
Yes.
Not just a football nerd, because
Correct.
he's got so many other interests. Aaron Rodgers, I think, on July 1st of this year, if you had said to him, okay, I'm giving you your choice, play quarterback for the Green Bay Packers this year or host Jeopardy this year, what would you do? I think absolutely he would have said host Jeopardy. And so he wants that well-rounded, fun person. Just tell me a little bit about how you found out about Nathaniel Hackett and how you developed that story.
Yeah. So I met Nathaniel Hackett at a QB Collective event in Indianapolis in the spring through Richmond Flowers. And it was just a chance to get to know.
Richmond Flowers, an agent for coaches.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. He has QB Collective, and he has a lot of coaches who work within this. Rich Scangarello, Vic's one of his clients. I don't know that he's involved with QB Collective, but it's kind of this inner network. A lot of coaches from the Shanahan tree, really. And they have these annual sharing of ideas. I think it's really cool from a coaching perspective, but they also train quarterbacks and share teaching tools, but also teach what they know. So it was a good chance to meet a lot of coaches, and I met him there, and he's just one of those people where you're like, wow, you are very much not like anybody in the NFL. And he's just so, as Aaron Rodgers said, he's very disarming. It's so easy to talk to him. He doesn't talk down to you. He's so, enthusiastic. He's such a happy person. He's hilarious. And you realize, wow, there's so much more to this person than just football. He's a football guy through and through. But there's so much more there. I mean, he's brilliant, loves wine. And I think that's another thing where him and Aaron Rodgers really bonded. But it's his personality and the way he comes off, the way he teaches. He just really has a way about him where he can get information across and make you remember it by the way he delivers it. I mean, in this teaching session I got to sit in on, it was hysterical. I mean, it was, clips of fans screaming and old clips of Brett Favre and, Joe Montana and some of Aaron Rodgers and just the commentary in between. It was his personality made it funny. His use of technology, made it engaging. And because of all that, you retain the information. It's not just like learning a new language from a textbook. You remember laughing about something and, oh yeah, this is what we were talking about. That's what it means. It's really a brilliant way to teach, and you wish you had more teachers like that. So he's just an interesting guy, very nice guy. And it was fun learning more about him from his other quarterbacks, because he's just hilarious. I can't imagine hearing a Justin Timberlake play call in the headset. So
Nicki Jhbvala, thanks so much for taking the time, and continued success.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Peter.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.